Good evening. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Gadi Schwartz coming to you from New York. And here are the stories we're watching tonight, starting with that failed armed mutiny in Russia and everything we know about it.
This is just the latest chapter in a book of failure that Putin has written for himself.
And we are going to break down the latest in that Russian rebellion that started marching to Moscow to challenge the Kremlin, only to be mysteriously called off. The man leading it, a mercenary warlord who may not have just been exiled to Belarus. Now, all this has us asking so many questions. First, who is Yevgeny Prigozhin? What is Putin going to do next? And how is this going to impact the war in Ukraine? We're going deep into all of it. Also, severe storms rocked a handful of towns in the Midwest, even leveling some homes and businesses.
Slammed the door at the last minute, locked it, ran in and jumped over my little boy in the bathtub.
And these dogs, they're not letting any snaggle teeth get in the way of their dreams. We're taking you inside the world's ugliest dog competition, which we got to judge for the first time.
When I'm sitting there at the judging sheet, I should put alien, check, hair coming out of the ears, check.
Yeah, teeth going on.
Snaggle teeth? And we start tonight in Russia, where Vladimir Putin has finally spoken out about that mutiny that had Russian mercenaries marching towards Moscow, even shooting down 2 Russian helicopters. Putin saying that those behind the revolt will be brought to justice.
The organizers of this rebellion cannot but understand that they will be brought to justice. Everybody understands that. This is criminal activity, which is aimed at weakening the country, and this was a colossal threat.
Now, we're going to get to some caveats there in just a second, but just to be upfront, the exact details on all of this are extremely hard to pin down, and a lot of it is going to be shrouded in misinformation from 2 of the most experienced disseminators of disinformation of the modern day. We all know Vladimir Putin's history as a KGB operative. The other man in this picture, Yevgeny Prigozhin, among the many things he's done, he's an alleged war criminal, oligarch. He's also the leader of the Wagner mercenary group. And an important note, he was also the man behind all those Russian troll farms that flooded the 2016 U.S. elections with bots and disinformation. All that to say, whatever we're reporting today could change in an instant. It's tough to pin it down. We've got correspondents all over the world covering this story. And here's what they are reporting. Over the weekend, Prigozhin, the leader of one of the largest soldier-for-hire groups in the world, that mercenary Wagner group, claimed that Russia had been firing rockets at Wagner soldiers fighting for Russia in Ukraine. Then suddenly, Prigozhin started moving tens of thousands of his mercenaries back into Russia, taking over Russian military posts and saying he was going to march up to Moscow. Then Prigozhin's loyalists started sweeping through the country towards the Kremlin, and videos like this started coming out showing armed forces marching on without being challenged before Prigozhin called it off. Prigozhin has come out with a statement since as well, saying he wasn't trying to overthrow Putin, but was sending a message to those who he accused of mismanaging that war, and said he was trying to protect his fighters.
We were going to demonstrate our protest and not the toppling of the power regime in the country.
And this is where things get even more murky. Right now, there has been some sort of agreement to let Prigozhin live in Belarus, even though he seems to have directly challenged Putin, and the Wagner group is to be disbanded and some of them absorbed into the Russian army. Ali Velshi is in Kyiv tonight following all of this. Ali, thanks so much for joining us. So now he is said to be in Belarus along with some of his soldiers. Does that mean that there are no more Wagner mercenaries in Ukraine?
That is a good and simple question with a very complicated answer. First of all, to put it in perspective, we're 60 miles from Belarus here in Kyiv. This war essentially started from Belarus. When those tanks came in February of 2022 to Kyiv, they came within 8 miles of where I am, the city center. They came down from Belarus. When a plane takes off from Belarus armed with hypersonic missiles, those missiles can be to where we are in 20 minutes. So Belarus, for the purposes of this war, is Russia. Belarus is a country that has an agreement with Russia that by 2030 they're going to become sort of a unified country. The president of Belarus is a puppet of Vladimir Putin. So there's a real question as to why Belarus is even involved in this thing and why somebody who's taking refuge from Vladimir Putin would be there. As for the troops, they fall into sort of three categories. There were those who rose up in rebellion, who are not anywhere to be found. They are going to Belarus with their leader. There are those who have agreed to join the Russian military, which was how this whole thing started. The Russian military will take them over, which is interesting because the Wagner Group was a much more effective fighting force. They were sort of, think about them as the special forces. The Russian military right now is made up mostly of conscripts. So that's going to happen there. There are still there are many soldiers in Ukraine right now. In fact, there's a tip line that a Russian soldier can call. There's an app if they want to surrender. And they've had, over the course of this war, 10,000 calls from Russians who want to surrender. So it's very unclear what role Wagner Group soldiers have right now. Some of them are becoming Russian soldiers. Some of them are dismissed from the army, and some of them are still in Ukraine. But they're not a fighting force under the leadership of Prigozhin anymore in Ukraine.
And when it comes to the deal between Prigozhin and Putin, what are the particulars there? Can you give credence to what we're seeing out there on Telegram and on social media?
It's very hard to. Vladimir Putin gave a speech in which he was visibly angry. He didn't take Prigozhin's name, which is typical, by the way, for Vladimir Putin when talking about an opponent. He has called him some awful things. So it doesn't sound like they're on friendly terms. But that said, if I were trying to get away from Vladimir Putin, I wouldn't go to Belarus. That's not an obvious choice. Belarus is filled with Russian troops. It was a launching pad for this war. Belarus is also a nuclear-armed country. So it's very murky as to what this deal is and what the president of Belarus was doing when cutting this deal. It almost defies belief that such a thing would happen. He's not somebody, the president of Belarus is not somebody with influence. He is subordinate to Vladimir Putin. So we're not quite sure what's going on, but Vladimir Putin is very clear on the fact that they are calling it an armed rebellion. He said that Prigozhin was trying to get Russians to fight with themselves, and he did not succeed. I'm not sure history will bear out that that's true. There's clearly some sort of fight going on in Russia. It seems that Prigozhin, by Saturday afternoon, deemed that he was not getting the support that he would have wanted in an armed rebellion or a coup. He didn't have generals who were coming over to him with their troops, and so he decided to cut and run. But it's not sure, this is not a play that's over yet. We're sort of somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, and Putin is all about projecting power. To have Prigozhin start heading towards Moscow and then now end up in Belarus, I mean, what is this going to do to Putin's image in Russia?
Well, so Putin's got an image problem in three places, right? He's got one in Russia, the domestic problem. He's always been a strong man. In 23 years, nothing like this has ever happened. So that's a problem. He's going to have to project power inside Russia. He's got a problem in Ukraine. Because he needs to look strong in his fight with Ukraine. And now the tip of the spear, the fighting force that was most effective in Ukraine, is gone, and their leader is in rebellion of Putin. And number three, Vladimir Putin is the strong man to the world, right? There are lots of dictators and authoritarians around the world who look to him as the model for expansionism and how to, buck world opinion. He now has to prove to various constituencies, and that's not even including NATO and America and the West, that he's actually strong. Remember, they went into this war with us thinking that Russia was the second strongest army in Europe, and the joke goes that Russia's not even the second strongest army in Ukraine. So at this point, we are a little worried about whether or not he's going to do something to reflect that power in Ukraine. He doesn't have the ground fighting force that he needs for that, but he's got missiles and he's got drones. So we're not sure how this plays out for Vladimir Putin. But I will say, watching him earlier today, he was angry, and you typically don't see Vladimir Putin angry. He's generally very measured and in control. He was visibly angry.
And Ali, one more question while you're there. What's happening in Ukraine? What's happening on the front lines?
Well, they are a few weeks into this so-called spring counteroffensive that they were launching. They've taken some ground, irrespective of what just happened with Wagner Group. They've reclaimed about 130 square kilometers. It's not a ton of land. It's about 9 or 10 villages or hamlets. So they were feeling pretty energized. The morale was good before this happened, and now what they see is that their oppressor and their invader there's something wrong. There's some damage there. So generally speaking, the Ukrainians are thinking this is probably good for them. But again, we are worried about if Vladimir Putin needs to project an image of strength or try and reclaim that image of strength, his best chance to do that would be to demonstrate in Ukraine that it's him and his army, not Prigozhin, who are prosecuting this war properly. So everybody's on pins and needles, but generally speaking, Ukrainians are feeling pretty positive about this.
Unpredictable times. Ali Velshi, thanks so much for being out there. Stay safe.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So exactly who is Yevgeny Prigozhin, and how did he become so entrenched in the Russian military complex? Well, according to reports, he started off as a petty criminal, which eventually landed him in jail for 10 years. And then after serving some time, Prigozhin started selling hot dogs with his family, then opened restaurants. Eventually, he started getting these massive contracts for supplying the military and schools with food, which is where he got Putin's attention. And somehow, just a few years later, he started building a mercenary army, recruiting prisoners to become soldiers in exchange for less time locked up. And that was just the beginning. NBC's Richard Engel has more.
A senior U.S. official tells NBC News the best way to understand what's happening now in Russia is a mafia power struggle. Yevgeny Prigozhin is a capo, a mid-level and until recently loyal soldier who has risen through the ranks by doing special tasks for his boss, President Putin. First, it was food. Prigozhin owned a chain of restaurants, including the New Haven in St. Petersburg, which Putin and his early team used as a hangout, earning him the nickname Putin's chef. Over time, he learned to cater to Putin's other needs. Most Americans know Prigozhin from the disinformation on their social media feeds. He founded a bot farm, the internet research agency that, according to the Justice Department, sowed doubts about the legitimacy of the 2016 election, highlighted racial tensions in the United States, and promoted Donald Trump. In 2022, Prigozhin reinvented himself again into a commander of a mercenary army, the Wagner Group, supplementing Russian troops in Ukraine, which were failing on the battlefield. He recruited thousands of convicts, promising pardons in exchange for frontline service. Thousands were sent to their deaths, and according to the few who managed to escape, they were shot if they attempted to retreat. I asked Ukraine's President Zelensky about the group earlier this month.
How do you describe Wagner and what it's doing on the ground here?
They are mercenaries and terrorists. They are just killers, he said. Prigozhin is also rich. He uses his private army to prop up dictators in Africa, in particular the president of the Central African Republic. In exchange, taking gold and blood diamonds worth $500 million a year, according to diplomats. But with money, power, and an armed force, Prigozhin has made enemies. He accuses Russia's defense minister and army chief, driven by jealousy and treason, of denying Wagner fighters ammunition. And now he wants revenge.
And here is a little more context from a video being circulated on Russian Telegram channels. Check this out. This is the response Prigozhin got as he was abandoning his march to Moscow and his men were pulling back. Those are people in the southern Russian city of Rostov-on-Don, and it's that kind of support that makes Prigozhin such a threat to Putin's power. NBC News international affairs analyst and former U.S. ambassador to Russia, Michael McFaul, joins us now. Ambassador McFaul, the EU foreign policy chief, said that Putin created this monster, Prigozhin, and then the monster is biting him. How big of a threat is Prigozhin to Putin?
Well, that's definitely the right analogy. He is the Frankenstein that Putin created, and then he made him even more powerful by invading Ukraine. Remember, had Putin not invaded Ukraine, this crisis would not be happening. That said, I don't see Prigozhin as somebody that's going to overthrow Putin. I think that goes too far. Putin is weaker because of this crisis, and he is not out of it yet. His statement tonight suggests that he needs to find a way to dismantle the Wagner forces. But I don't see Prigozhin at this stage in the crisis as being in a position to overthrow Putin or any other part of the faction of the government, including Mr. Gerasimov, General Gerasimov, the head of the armed forces, Mr. Shoigu, the defense minister, who at one point, just a few days ago, was the aim of Prigozhin's mutiny.
Putin doesn't come across as the kind of person to let something like this go. We heard very targeted, and yet he didn't say Prigozhin's name in that speech that he gave today, but a targeted attack on those he said were behind this mutiny, and yet he's saying he's going to uphold the deal. So he says they'll be brought to justice, and then we will uphold the deal. It seems like he's talking out of both sides of his mouth there.
Exactly. He's walking this very delicate balancing act between, on the one hand, keeping his word for the deal he did with Prigozhin. He didn't escalate. He didn't go in and take him out. When push came to shove, they played a game of chicken, and they both swerved. But then tonight, he is doubling down to call them traitors, to say that those that were the leaders, the commanders of the Wagner force, were betraying the patriots, the common soldiers, the common mercenaries. And he's trying to drive a wedge between the commanders on the one hand and the thousands of soldiers that are still armed and that haven't taken his deal to join the conventional forces. And so far, I don't think he's achieved that objective yet.
We heard Ali Velshi earlier today reporting a little bit about some app that the Russians were using, or the Russian army was using, to allow for Wagner mercenaries to basically say, hey, we want to be a part of the army, and he cited around 10,000 soldiers. Have you seen those reports? And if that's accurate, what does that say about what's going on?
I've seen very conflicting reports. There's what you just recalled, 10,000, lots are defecting, lots are joining. But Prigozhin himself just this morning said only 1% to 2% of his forces have joined the conventional forces. So I don't know who's right and who's wrong. I have to speculate that Putin would not have given that dramatic speech had they all decided to join up with his forces, because that speech was an appeal to those soldiers to join him and to, basically go against the will and the wishes of the commanders, including Mr. Prigozhin. I want to be clear. He said the commanders, not just Prigozhin, those that had led you astray, he said. They were deceptive. They told you lies. Come over to my side and distance yourself from those traitors. You don't make that speech if you already have achieved that objective.
Yeah, we're seeing these pictures of people posing with soldiers. A lot of the Wagner soldiers have been recruited from prisons, right? And in fact, I think we have some video of Prigozhin recruiting some for fighting in Ukraine. Let's take a quick look.
Наверное, слышали, ЧВК «Вагнер» называется. Война тяжелая. На всякие там чеченские и так далее близко не похоже. Минимальный возраст, который мы берем, это 22 года. Если моложе, бумажка от ближайших родственников, что они не против. Максимальный возраст условно, это 50 лет, но если крепкий, прямо здесь на собеседовании делаем элементарные тесты, смотрим, насколько крепок, физическая форма крайне необходима. Смотрим, насколько ты крепок, и тогда принимаем решение и берем.
And so he seems to be doing that in exchange for some time off, showing that he's clearly got the blessing of the government. I guess, what happens with the Wagner fighters that are right now switching over to Russia? And are these classically trained soldiers, or a lot of these just people that were in prison a little while ago and are now on the front lines in Ukraine?
It's both, and it's a really good point that you're making. On the one hand, Wagner's been around for many years. They fought in different places around the world, in Africa and Syria, and now they have a lot of experience fighting in Ukraine. There's that soldier, the mercenaries who've been hired guns working for Prigozhin. But as you just showed, because out of desperation that they needed more conscripts, particularly to go to the city of Bakhmut, where they've been fighting for a long, long time, for many, many months, they decided to go and get these other kinds of conscripts, these criminals that joined up with Wagner to fight in Bakhmut. To the best of my knowledge, all of those that took the deal are not going back to jail. They have now the opportunity to either go to Belarus with Mr. Prigozhin or to join the Russian military.
Ambassador, I'm so glad you brought up Bakhmut. I've heard some conversations, some people who haven't been paying a lot of attention to what's going on, seeing this and thinking, oh, look, the enemy of my enemy might be my friend, and not really understanding the intricacies of what's happening in Ukraine. But walk us through what Prigozhin is accused of doing in Ukraine.
Well, he fought in the worst battle so far of this war, the Battle of Bakhmut. It's not the equivalent of the Battle of Stalingrad. That was much worse, but oftentimes it's referred that way for this war. He's known to have killed his own soldiers when they were trying to defect. He's been accused of a lot of things. He's a killer. He's a hired gun to kill people. He's a thug. We should have no illusions that he's some kind of good guy. These are bad guys fighting bad guys, and better that the bad guys are at least, they didn't fight that, for very long, but they did fight. There were casualties. Better that they're taking on each other than taking on the Ukrainians. But we should have no illusions. Just because people want their photo ops in Rostov with this guy, he is not a good guy.
It would also seem as though we're seeing two unpredictable strongmen that are kind of backed into a corner here. Putin politically, Prigozhin, maybe, I don't know, Belarus, but also his life is on the line. Do you see it that way?
Well, if you go back about several days ago, most certainly Prigozhin thought that his days were numbered. The Russian government said you had till July 1st to disband. They were telling his soldiers to join the Russian army. And then allegedly, we can't confirm it, but he showed photos of it, the Russian army actually attacked one of his camps in Ukraine. And I think he just felt like they were putting the squeeze on him, and he decided to do this audacious march to Moscow to try to get Putin's attention, to underscore his argument that Gerasimov, the general in charge of the armed forces, and Shoigu, the defense minister, were corrupt. And he very deliberately tried to say they were being deceptive towards Mr. Putin. But Putin didn't take that bait. Putin decided, no, you guys are the traitors. And on tonight, when their National Security Council was meeting, Shoigu was there. And that suggests that Prigozhin lost that round.
He lost that round, but he sure succeeded in capturing attention.
That's
Ambassador
for sure.
McFall, thank you so much for joining us.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
And up next, we are on Storm Watch. Millions of Americans are going to see some pretty bad weather tonight, and people in the Midwest are cleaning up the mess after several tornadoes touched down. That is all coming up just ahead, so stay tuned. Hey there, welcome back. And here are some of the other headlines we're watching tonight. 3 San Antonio police officers have been charged with murder. They are accused of killing a woman named Melissa Perez, who was going through an apparent mental health crisis. Now, police say Perez did not listen to their directions to leave her apartment, and one officer opened fire when she threw a candlestick. The rest opened fire when she allegedly started swinging a hammer. And one person is dead and another is hurt after a boat crashed into a ferry near Miami Beach early on Sunday morning. Miami Fire Rescue says the 32-foot boat hit the Fisher Island ferry, which is 146 feet long. Today, a judge sentenced the Club Q mass shooter Anderson Lee Aldrich to life in prison. They pleaded guilty to killing 5 people and hurting 17 others at an LGBTQ nightclub in Colorado Springs. They were charged with 323 criminal counts, including first-degree murder and bias-motivated crimes. And a jury will decide whether to give the Tree of Life synagogue mass shooter the death penalty. Earlier this month, the same jury found Robert Bowers guilty on all 63 federal charges in the 2018 shooting. He was convicted of killing 11, which is the deadliest anti-Semitic attack in American history. And President Joe Biden has a $42 billion plan to give every American household access to high-speed internet by the end of the decade. And White House officials are comparing the plan to Franklin D. Roosevelt's effort to bring electricity to rural America back in the 1930s. And tonight, yet another American community is sifting through shattered homes destroyed by a tornado. A funnel cloud tore through Indiana, killing at least one person. Here's NBC correspondent Emily Akeda with more on the relentless extreme storms.
A weekend of wild weather now closing in on the East Coast, while a suffocating heat cripples tens of millions in the South for yet another week. Parts of Texas approaching the all-time state record of 120 degrees.
Almost like as hot as the sun.
With the heat pressing on, Texas's power grid operator preparing for electricity use to break records again this week.
It's going to be probably uncomfortable again if the power is going to go down.
Across the eastern half of the country, tonight more than 300,000 are without power. After whipping winds flipped plains in Tennessee, ping-pong ball-sized hail pounded Alabama, and since Friday, dozens of reported tornadoes tore through Minnesota, Kentucky, and Indiana, where one person died. Watch as an ominous funnel forms outside of Indianapolis.
My husband came running down the stairs saying, "Everyone in the basement."
Today, a tangled mess of trees and power lines blankets nearby neighborhoods. And in the Northeast, flight disruptions soaring, with thunderstorms prompting ground stops and delays at major airports. Severe weather sweeping from Charleston to New York as the threat could worsen overnight. Emily Ikeda, NBC News, New York.
And now let's bring in NBC News meteorologist Bill Cairns. Bill, what's in store for the Northeast?
Well, we're wrapping up our severe weather, and then it quiets down the rest of the week, but we still have to get through the next couple hours. We haven't had anything too ominous. You know, that's great, especially compared to the last 2 weeks where it seemed like daily tornadoes across the country. So far, no reports of any tornadoes. We've had some hail. We've had some wind damage, no injuries or anything like that. And the severe weather threat still goes all the way from upstate New York down through the mid-Atlantic into North Carolina and a little sliver there of South Carolina. The strongest storms all day, actually, have been on the Delaware River area, right from Pennsylvania, New Jersey. That's where we had a couple tornado warnings. We've had some significant flash flooding. The new storms that we're tracking, and this is the area that we thought we'd probably have some really strong storms with, that D.C. to Richmond corridor. Well, D.C.'s been fine, but Richmond, you're now under a severe thunderstorm warning. You got some really big storms. And when you start to see the pink on this map and some of the purples, that's where usually we're talking about hail. And we do have the potential of hail large enough to maybe do some dents on a car, maybe break some glass. So hopefully not, but that's the potential in the Richmond area over the next hour. Tomorrow, we're going back into the middle of the country, but just a little sliver here right along the Kansas-Oklahoma border between Wichita and Oklahoma City, mostly wind damage and large hail. So we could go 2 days in a row with hardly any tornadoes, which is, you know, a big change from what we've been dealing with lately.
And talking about Texas, I mean, that big red blob right there, is there going to be any relief to this?
I would love to give them some relief. I mean, Del Rio was on 7 days in a row, a record high each and every day. And they've been keeping records there for over 100 years. Wow. So, I mean, that's like, you know, just no relief whatsoever. And in areas like San Angelo, you've already had 3 days in the last 2 weeks, which would be your all-time hottest temperatures ever recorded. Your 3 hottest days ever have been in the last 2 weeks. And that's not changing. All the little red dots on this map show you where we're going to break record highs. Now, these are daily record highs over the next, 3 days. So that goes from New Orleans to Oklahoma City, all the way back to El Paso and Tucson. So the temperatures right now, Del Rio is at 111. The record high was 109. So they've already done, they broke that again. And Dallas is flirting with 100. May not get there, be close. San Antonio, 103. That's one of the hottest you've been all summer long. And as we go throughout the next 3 days, I mean, not much changes. Dallas goes up to 107 on Wednesday. Del Rio, 108, 108. You cool off to 104 on Thursday. That's not much relief. And even Houston, triple digits. You get the idea here. And as we look towards the extended forecast, this is going to be out through the 4th of July. Still warmer than normal from Florida all the way through Texas. Hundreds are possible in Florida, which is pretty rare for Florida because the oceans are nearby. In the West Coast, to all our friends here, including Gadi's friends, is finally warming up after kind of a gloomy June. Things are looking better as we head towards the 4th.
Clear Los Angeles. That's what we're hoping for. Thanks so much. Hey, welcome back. Let's get you caught up in 30 seconds. For the first time today since the mercenary rebellion in Russia, we are hearing from both Vladimir Putin and Yevgeny Prigozhin. Putin called the rebel leaders traitors and said Russia would have crushed the revolt. And tornadoes tore through the Midwest and South on Sunday, leaving at least 3 people dead. And the Club Q shooter who killed 5 people in Colorado last year was sentenced to life in prison. Meanwhile, the prosecution in the Idaho murders case is now seeking the death penalty for Bryan Kohberger. But Kohberger's lawyers say there is no connection between him and the 4 murdered University of Idaho students. Now, all this is in this court filing. The defense criticizing why authorities zeroed in on Kohberger as a suspect when they say 3 other people's DNA was found at the scene of the crime. But DNA that likely belonged to Kohberger was found on a knife sheath, and he was arrested after a long manhunt and indicted by a grand jury last month. NBC's Nyla Charles joins us now. Nyla, we're hearing talks of the death penalty. What can you tell us about that?
Well, in Idaho, Gadi, it's incredibly rare. Since 1864 in Idaho, only 29 people have been executed, and even now, there are only 8 people on death row. Now, prosecutors, in justifying their seeking of the death penalty here in this court filing, have listed 5 aggregating factors, and for them that they say appear to be present. And there, that includes that they say that this is a heinous crime and that it shows an utter disregard for human life. Gadi?
And Nyla, that court filing, how important is this DNA, this piece of DNA evidence? What kind of role is that going to play in this case?
DNA is proving to be extremely important in this case here, Gadi, because like you said, the defense here for Kohberger, they're saying that there's no connection from him to the victims because they say no victim's DNA was found in his car, his home, or his office. They're also challenging the use of genetic genealogy here by the prosecutors to connect Kohberger to this crime. What we do know is that in a court filing, prosecutors have said they used genetic genealogy by narrowing it down to Kohberger's family, and from there narrowing it down to him because they got a DNA test from him, from his cheek, that they used to connect him to the crime with the DNA that was found on the knife sheath. But his defense has a big problem with that. They have said that in this court filing, saying that rather than seeing it as some sort of complex tree building that led to him, it appears far more like a lineup where the government was already aware of who they wanted to target. And what they're referring to there, Gadi, is prosecutors' use of a private lab and genetic genealogy testing site like 23andMe to create a suspect profile that includes a family tree. So that's what they're pointing to, and it's proving to be controversial from the opinion of the defense. Gadi?
What are experts saying about genetic genealogy and how it plays into criminal investigations? How often do we see it brought into a serial killer case?
Well, experts say it can be incredibly useful. We know that it's been used several times to make convictions, including the Golden State Killer. Now, experts say, although, like I said, it could be useful, they say it does have its limitations. And for that reason, they say it shouldn't be the sole use for evidence when arresting or convicting anyone. So tomorrow in the court hearing, what we expect, Gadi, is for the defense to ask prosecutors for more information on the DNA test that led them to Kohberger, because so far it's been the strongest piece of evidence that prosecutors have submitted. And that's going to be really important in the defense's argument, especially with the stakes incredibly high now, given the fact that the prosecutors are seeking the death penalty. Gadi?
Nyla Charles, thanks so much. And now to the investigation into the implosion that killed all 5 people on the Titan submersible last week. U.S. and Canadian officials are interviewing the mothership's crew to learn more about what happened. And we are now hearing from the mother of one of those victims. NBC's Tom Costello has more.
At the site of last week's disaster, salvage teams are now collecting the debris from the mini-submersible named Titan that imploded not far from the wreck of the Titanic. Canadian investigators have now boarded the Polar Prince that served as the mothership, retrieving the voyage data recorder and interviewing crew and victims' family members who were on board. Among them, Christine Dawood, who lost her husband Shahzada and their 19-year-old son Suleiman.
When we passed the 96 hours mark, that's when I lost hope.
She told the BBC Suleiman was looking forward to the trip.
It was supposed to be Shahzada and I going down. But then I stepped back and gave the space to Suleiman because he really wanted to go.
The investigations now underway include Canada's Transportation Safety Board and Royal Canadian Mounted Police, as well as a Coast Guard Marine Board of Investigation leading the U.S. investigation.
It can make recommendations to the proper authorities to pursue civil or criminal sanctions
as necessary. Investigators will look at whether now-deceased OceanGate CEO Stockton Rush ignored outside warnings that the sub's carbon fiber shell could fail at crushing depths. As for who pays for the search, 13,000 square miles, 11 ships, 4 planes, 5 ROVs. No official cost estimate, but the Coast Guard says it doesn't charge for life-saving operations. That's its job. Anyone missing at sea deserves to be rescued. Gadi?
And heading now to the U.S.-Mexico border, where U.S. Customs and Border Protection says they're seeing about 3,000 crossings every single day. And that Texas backdrop is where Florida Governor Ron DeSantis made a campaign stop today. This morning, he unveiled his, quote, no excuses border policy.
You have thousands of illegal aliens that will show up. What does that do for medical care? What does that do for education? What does that do for criminal justice?
Joining us now from Eagle Pass, Texas, is NBC's Gabe Gutierrez. Gabe, what's in this border policy?
Hi there, Gadi. Well, critics of DeSantis' new border policy rollout say it largely mirrors what the Trump administration had put forward several years ago. But Governor DeSantis and his team say the difference is that former President Trump could not execute his border plan, and they will. Well, among some of the things in this plan is re-implementing the controversial Remain in Mexico policy, ending so-called birthright citizenship, and also setting aside more money to recruit Border Patrol agents, also using the U.S. military, the Navy, the Coast Guard to block shipments of fentanyl-making chemicals from China that go into Mexico, blocking them from those Mexican ports. So also something that drew a lot of attention today, Gadi, is this idea of potentially endorsing the use of deadly force against undocumented immigrants who came into the U.S. and cut through border fences. And that is raising a lot of eyebrows, because how do you tell the difference between a potential drug smuggler and perhaps somebody who isn't a drug smuggler? I asked the governor about that today. He really focused in on this idea of what he calls hostile intent. And he says that law enforcement officials here on the border should be allowed to use a deadly force. So again, an aggressive policy rollout in terms of immigration, what has previously been Donald Trump's signature issue, Gadi.
What's the latest situation on the border there?
Well, look, in the last several days, one official here with the Texas Department of Public Safety says that this area, Eagle Pass and also Del Rio, Texas, has seen an uptick in unauthorized border crossings, that they're seeing more than 1,000 to about 1,200 unauthorized border crossings, border encounters as they're known, each day over the last several days. But another official told us that since the end of that COVID border restriction known as Title 42, there's actually been a decrease in that. But Gadi, this, as you know, this is a topic, an issue that is certain to come up in this GOP primary race, and it already has. It always does, Gadi.
And how is that polling right now? We've got a new NBC News poll that shows DeSantis lagging far behind Trump. What is the strategy, and how does immigration play in?
Right. And look, there's a lot negative in that national poll for Ron DeSantis. He's trailing the front runner, Donald Trump, now by almost 30 points. Now, I asked Governor DeSantis about that, how he has dropped 9 points since his campaign launch. And I asked him what he's telling his supporters, what he's telling donors to convince them that he still has what it takes. Take a listen.
I think if you look at the swing states, Biden beats Trump in the swing states, and I beat Biden handily in the swing states. That's ultimately the election right there.
So again, Gadi, that's the argument he's trying to make. He's saying that in these early states that he is better positioned to take on Joe Biden than Donald Trump. It remains to be seen. He's really putting a lot of time into places like Iowa, South Carolina. He's heading to New Hampshire tomorrow. The question is, will that really work? And frankly, he's down again, 29 points in this national poll. His campaign trying to make the case it's really about individual states, not the national poll. And then once he does well in those early states, the momentum will carry him to the GOP nomination. We'll wait and see. It's early.
NBC's Gabe Gutierrez. Thanks so much. Could get a big Supreme Court ruling tomorrow on affirmative action. There's a possibility that colleges and universities won't take race into consideration when it comes to admission. So what would that even look like? NBC's Laura Jarrett reports.
For many elite schools, the writing from the nation's high court is on the wall.
How worried are you? I'm extremely worried.
Danielle Hawley is the incoming president of Mount Holyoke College in Western Massachusetts. But this peaceful campus belies an anxious reality. As soon as tomorrow, the Supreme Court will answer the most anticipated question this term. Can colleges and universities look at race in admissions decisions?
Everyone is talking about this case all the time. People from departments that are not in the law school are asking me, what day will we hear?
For decades, the court recognized the educational benefits of a diverse student body and said schools can look at someone's race as one plus factor among many. But the court's current conservative majority may ban it nationwide this time.
What will that do to a place like Mount Holyoke? It will send a very strong message to Black students and to Latina students that they are not welcome.
Not so, say the lawyers who sued Harvard over its admissions plan. Long treated by the court as the gold standard, it's now accused of being obsessed with race, and along with the University of North Carolina, of discriminating against Asian students, which the schools deny but was emphasized during oral arguments.
Asians should be getting into Harvard more than whites, but they don't because Harvard gives them significantly lower personal ratings. Harvard ranks Asians less likable, confident, and kind.
If the court agrees using race violates the law, schools may still look at an applicant's finances, zip code, or even consider essays about overcoming adversity, so-called race-neutral alternatives.
Universities just cannot consider race itself.
Colleges tell NBC News they are prepared to adapt if required, expanding financial aid, scrapping SAT scores, or getting rid of legacy admissions, all potentially on the table. But Hawley says ignoring race would produce a devastating result.
We've seen a track record of them not working.
She points to California, one of 9 states that outlawed affirmative action more than 20 years ago, causing a 50% drop-off in minority admissions, numbers that have never bounced back, as seen by UC Berkeley.
I have struggled to really move the Black number here at Berkeley, and that, again, that's not from a lack of trying.
Femi Ogundele, Berkeley's Dean of Undergrad Admissions, says affirmative action was never perfect, just a Band-Aid.
The fact that there are high schools in this country that have manicured lawns and golf courses, and there are high schools in this country that have bars on the windows and metal detectors in the hallways, and yet we are asking both of those students to show up in our application process the same, doesn't make any sense.
For now, schools are bracing for the dawn of a new era, making the task of equalizing the playing field not impossible, but significantly harder. Laura Jarrett, NBC News, South Hadley, Massachusetts.
And coming up, killer whales strike again. This time they attacked a sailing boat during a race. That wild is just ahead, so stay tuned.
You don't have any control anymore over the rudders and the boat, and we know some incidents that the orcas made some boats sink.
Hey, welcome back. Let's take a look at what's happening around the world in 80 seconds. In North Korea, more than 100,000 people marched in anti-U.S. rallies over the weekend. Now, they vowed to, quote, pulverize the American empire and called for, quote, annihilation of U.S. imperialists. All this is happening on the 73rd anniversary since the Korean War started. In Istanbul, Turkish authorities have detained at least 50 people during Pride celebrations yesterday. According to organizers, anti-LGBTQ hostility is growing in Turkey, including from the president himself. And Sarah Ferguson, the Duchess of York, is recovering from surgery after being diagnosed with breast cancer. The ex-wife of Prince Andrew and the former daughter-in-law of Queen Elizabeth underwent a single mastectomy after a routine mammogram revealed cancer. A rep says her surgery was successful. And music lovers, it is the end of an era for Elton John. The British icon performed at the Glastonbury Festival last night in what was the last UK show of his farewell tour. What a way to go out. According to overnight ratings, his set was watched by a record 7.3 million people live on BBC One, the biggest ever for an overnight audience for a Glastonbury performance. And it's happened once again. Killer whales attacking another boat. This time they went after a Dutch sailing boat that was racing in the Gibraltar Strait. NBC's Maggie Vespa has more with some incredible video.
The latest deep-sea scare with a trio of orcas targeting this Dutch yacht off the coast of Spain.
Coming from the rudder?
Watch as the so-called killer whales circle the boat, then repeatedly ram its rudder.
Oh my God. They're gonna get the rudder?
The crew competing in a race Thursday along the Gibraltar Strait dropped their sails, slowing down. After 15 minutes, the orcas leave. No damage or injuries.
It was a scary moment on board because, you don't have any control anymore over the rudders and the boat. And we know some incidents that the orcas made some boats sink.
This orca encounter part of a puzzling pattern, with one group near Spain nearly sinking this boat last month. In another video, you can see a whale chewing on a chunk of a boat. Experts say killer whale interactions have been on the rise since 2020, with more than 200 last year. And while Hollywood provides no shortage of stories about oceanic predators taking aim at humans,
you don't consider these attacks.
I don't.
Real-life experts deem this trend a likely fluke.
I think that one individual came into contact with the underside of a sailboat, found it interesting or pleasurable, and other members of the population took up the behavior.
Oh my God.
One theory behind a wave of whale run-ins. Maggie Vespa, NBC News.
And usually if someone tells you that you're ugly, you want to curl up and cry. But for these dogs, I don't know, once you get to know them, ugly is just another word for cute. We're going to introduce you to the world's ugliest dog. He is such a sweetheart. Come back. The world's ugliest dog is Scooter. Scooter, you're going to New York! And race car driving goes green. This weekend, Portland, Oregon became the 4th U.S. city to host the Formula E race. Now, that's a lot like the International Formula One competition, but with one major distinction. Formula E cars are 100% electric. NBC News correspondent Ann Thompson has that story.
It has all the looks and feels of auto racing.
There's contact. Heidfeld's in the wall.
But not the sounds. This is Formula E, E as in electric. Among the 11 teams competing at the Portland, Oregon E-Prix, a legendary name in auto racing, Andretti Autosports. IndyCar champion Michael Andretti is CEO.
What's the attraction for you with Formula E?
What attracted me to it was the new technology. You know, racing is at the forefront of the technology, so we're seeing stuff that you're probably going to see in your road cars one day.
On the track this year, the Gen 3, billed as the fastest, most sustainable e-car yet. Alessandra Chiliberti is the technical manager.
So do you have two motors in this car?
Exactly. Enabling drivers to recharge the car through braking. Energy now captured from all 4 wheels.
We're not losing the energy, we're just storing that back into the battery for propelling the car.
Gone are the days when they had to switch cars in the middle of the race because the battery didn't last. Now the battery goes the whole race, some 53 minutes, at speeds of up to 200 miles per hour. Jake Dennis drives for Andretti.
Do you miss the sound of traditional racing?
No, you enjoy it. You enjoy having the peace and quiet, honestly. There's no noise, no vibration, super smooth. It's like a pleasure to drive one of these. You just hear the wind.
There are no gears and ideally no pit stops. Michael Andretti took me for a ride.
What should I expect?
I don't know. I never drove one around
I'm
here.
feeling real good about this.
We'll learn together. I need a few more laps.
I think you did pretty well for your first time. But there's an even more important competition going on here, the race to sustainability. And everyone, from the owners to the vendors to the fans, can win.
Julia Palais drives this effort. The car's electricity is generated from renewable energy.
Actually, this renewable energy here is coming from basically the waste cooking oils from your French fries that is turned into a biofuel that is called HVO.
A sport that CEO Jeff Dodds says is also a learning opportunity for fans.
They're seeing amazing racing brands, so they're seeing elite sport, but they're also seeing a platform to talk about sustainability.
To drive us into the future.
Thank you. Yeah, to learn more about what's happening at the Aspen Ideas Festivals, you can scan the QR code on the screen and you can see their live blog. You can also watch all the conversations we've been talking about on YouTube and other website platforms. We thank you so much for watching Top Story. I'm Tom Yamas in Aspen for this special edition. Stay right there. More news on the way.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.